Hey guys, it's Miss Knappenberger. Welcome back to the Middle Bits Period 3. What is Europe up to at this point? I've set my timer for 45 minutes. I have got my fancy purple pen and I am ready to go, so I hope you are too. We're on Feudalism versus Centralized Governments, page 4. Okay, so Eastern Europe, the Slavs, remain very feudal for a very long time. In fact, the Russians do not outlaw serfdom until the 1860s, right around the same time the United States outlaws slavery. So they are really feudal for quite some time, because remember, feudalism is all about you sort of have the castle or the manor, and then the lord who's living there, and then all of the nearby peasants are essentially paying the Lord for protection. They are staying on his land to work his land and then giving him part of their harvests and profits, kind of a thing. But Eastern Europe does this until the 1860s or so. States began to come together in Western Europe. The three big ones that we care about are England, France, and Spain, because these are the ones that are going to go over to the New World and really take the biggest portions of the New World and be the major players in the next section of world history. Another major thing when we're talking about states and governments is the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is a document. King John of England is forced to sign it by the nobility because they don't like him. They don't like the way he's been doing things, and so they force him to sign it. And essentially, it took power away from him and put it in their hands. So it isn't democratic by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly took power away from the king. It provided for the limitation of government. Eventually, we also get the creation of parliaments. A parliament is a style of government. They are governmental bodies designed to give voice, originally specifically to the nobility and the clergy in policy making, because again, the church was more or less the political head as well, since they were the cultural head. And also, during this time period, there is no separation of church and state. Church and state are the same thing in a lot of times. So again, the idea that the clergy would not be included in government is laughable for this time period. There is still lots of competition. That is the smallest square ever for competition, but I fit it in, and it is the beginning of modern democracies. Even if they're not actually that democratic, we're starting to put limitations on governments. We're starting to sort of look through that avenue, kind of a thing. Stronger monarchs build stronger armies, because you can. And your neighbor's building a big army. You gotta build a big army too. What if they come over and they attack you with their big army? William the Conqueror was a French fella. He was a Norman coming from Normandy, and he brings all of his Frenchies to invade England in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings. This is super, super important for a lot of reasons. The French bring democracy-ish. The French bring bureaucracy. The French bring a lot of French words, and so a lot of our words in English we get from the French. So, for example, the word bureaucracy is from this time period, and also it creates this animosity, this dislike between England and France, which then they fight out for years and years and years and years and years. So they fight out in the Hundred Years' War, which is actually just a little bit longer than 100 years, but hey, let's round it down. In the 14th and 15th centuries, for the French to regain English-controlled French territories. This is the one with Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc is actually the one who turns the tide on the 100 Years' War. She's the one who actually manages to kick the English out of France for good, but then is taken captive by the English, and the French are like, well, she was a lady, so bye-bye, see you later. And she gets burned at the stake for being a witch at the age of 19. Crazy. Some really important things did come out of the 100 Years' War, though, mostly to do with advancements in weaponry. The longbow, for example. The longbow allows your arrow to go further, so you can kill people more effectively from a distance. Big game changer. Big game changer. So there's good old William the Conqueror. He does not look that threatening, but he does have a big fat sword in his hand. I don't know what those bird things are. Don't ask. And then here's a picture of King John. He is the King John you always think of from Robin Hood, where King Richard leaves and then Prince John is like terrible. Pretty sure it's the same John. I also really like how he's sitting on his horse and he's like, oh, yes, hello. Look at this, yes. He is going off on a stag hunt. You can see the stag there in the front of the panel, and his little doggies are chasing around behind. But Prince John, King John, doesn't seem that perturbed, really. Okay. Oh dear, all of these all at once. So I will write them all down, then I'll talk. Robin Hood is an underrated Disney movie. Excellent Disney movie. Oh my gosh, that is also the smallest little box for Protestantism. Eek! I didn't fit it. All right, I'm done writing, so I'm going to start talking. Western Europe starts beginning to expand outward and around the 900s or so. They expand into Spain. They push the Muslims back a little bit some because we haven't quite gotten to this yet, but as the Islamic caliphates move outward, I believe it's the Umayyad dynasty makes it all the way through North Africa and conquers part of Spain, and they are definitely part of the Abbasid caliphate for a while. So Western Europe starts pushing back into Spain, pushing some of the Muslims out a little bit, pushing them further south into Spain. They begin expanding into Poland, which technically is part of Europe, but theoretically it's northeastern Europe, and the Middle East. There's also a lot of population growth. There are just too many people, and they need places to put them. So they're expanding, there's too many people, and we need new land to put them. But there's also this missionary zeal going on during the same time, and they have a series of sort of like miniature wars called the Crusades. I don't think it's the first one, but the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I also calls out to Western Europe and is like, help us resist the Turks. And Europe is like, okay. And then they come and they're like, oh, is this city meant for us to sack? Okay, we'll just go ahead and do that. So they sack Constantinople in 1204. Pope Urban II calls upon Christian knights to save the Holy Land, to save Jerusalem from the Turks who were coming, and they promised salvation and reward for those who would help in this quest. What is your quest? The thing is that's sort of a little bit confusing is that, the Bible says don't kill people, and then they say go kill people for Jesus, and Jesus says, I didn't ask you to do that. I would really rather you didn't kill people for me. So all of these crusaders come back, and the church is basically like, so you're damned to hell. And all the crusaders are like, what? You promised me salvation. And the church is like, no. We've got a thing for this, okay? So you kill people, yes, okay, fine. You kill people, yes, but you kill people for God. And the crusaders are like, yes, we did kill people for God. And so the church is like, what if we give you these get out of hell free cards that you have to buy, but like, still, whatever. They're get out of hell free cards. And the crusaders are like, ooh, yeah. Because, we killed for God. And the church is like, we know, sweetie. But we also need funds because, like, we like to dress in cloth that's woven with gold thread in it. So, Could you give us some money? So indulgences basically are get out of hell free cards. You purchase them, they're really expensive, but you get out of hell free. And so then later, Martin Luther is this sort of German monk who is like, this can't be right. You shouldn't be able to pay your way out of heaven. Jesus said it's easier for a camel to fit through the eye of the needle than a wealthy man to get into heaven. Like, wealth and heaven should go hand in hand. And so he accidentally founds Protestantism by protesting against lots of what he sees as corruptions in the Roman Catholic Church and just sort of going in the wrong direction in the Roman Catholic Church. And one of his big gripes is indulgences and this get out of hell free card. The First Crusade is the most successful. They win back Jerusalem. I don't know why I said they win back, because Western Europe never controlled Jerusalem in the first place, but they take over Jerusalem for about 100 years, and then the Arab general Saladin and ruler takes it back in the 1100s. So here's a depiction of them in the Holy Land, retaking it. You can see everything in the background is on fire. They're putting up the white flag, and everybody in the front is so thankful. They're staring up at God. The light of God is shining down on them and possibly those they've killed. Although she still looks alive over here. She just looks sad, if alive. And they're very clearly like church people. They've got all of these crosses on them and whatever. This guy looks extra tired, so tired that he's leaning on this poor monk. Did the monk ask to be leaned on? Actually, he kind of does look like he asked to be leaned on. But anyways, dramatic reinterpretation of this. So again, not actually again, but the Crusades began in 1095. That was when the first one was. And again, they hold Jerusalem for about 100 years. I'm going to stop talking so you can write. Okay, I'm done writing, so I'm going to start talking. So they began in 1095. They were very religious in nature. It was the Pope saying we need to take back the Holy Land from the infidels, from the Arabs, from the Turks. And because they're religious in nature, it transcends political issues and everybody supports it. We have a common enemy, the Muslims, the Arabs, the Jews, the other varieties of Christianity, basically anyone who wasn't European and Roman Catholic. But everybody's getting together to support this. It's kind of like how nobody likes Nickelback. Everybody hates Nickelback, and everybody makes fun of Nickelback, and everybody's okay with that. So, like, common enemy, you know? And there's also this idea of save our culture. Jerusalem is the root of Christianity, and it is our culture, and if we do not go over there and save it, our heritage, our culture, it will be lost to the Turks and the Arabs. And they want to take back the Holy Land because it was where Jesus was born and stuff like that. It did demonstrate the European ability to organize. It does not demonstrate the European ability to be successful because the Crusades very much were not successful. But hey, they can put an army together and stick them in the right direction. Lots and lots of people died. Not just Europeans, but also lots of Muslims, lots of Jewish people living in the area. And again, we talked about this once before, but other sects of Christianity. We were talking about Ethiopia and saying how they are Coptic Christians. That's one of those other sects of Christianity. So they would roll into town, essentially, and the Arab towns would kick out all of their Christians because they were like, the dudes coming for us are Christians, you're Christians, like, what if you betray us? We're just not totally sure, so could you kind of like scooch? And the Christians in the little towns are like, well, we're not going to do that, but we kind of see where you're coming from, so like, we understand why you're kicking us out. So they kick them out, and then the Arab Christians would be like, okay, our peeps are coming, this is so exciting, they're also Christians, how cool. So the Crusaders would show up, the Arab Christians would be like, hey guys, and the Crusaders would just and kill them, mostly, almost all the time. So lots of Coptic Christians and stuff like that. They weren't the right brand of Christianity. There was also fighting in the Iberian Peninsula. Please remember that Iberian refers to Spain, Spanish Peninsula, and that's the Moors. And there was also some fighting in the Baltic states. Over in the Baltic states are like uh, Slovenia, Bosnia Herzegovina, those sort of countries in there, Montenegro sort of in there, and that's because they were fighting against the Eastern Orthodox Church instead. So here's a delightful picture of the Crusaders coming in. I love this picture. Sorry, I had a yawn. I love this picture because it gets, again, weirder the longer you look at it. What is up with these weird little boats? Are they little? Are they big? I super can't tell. I really like how this guy is like, I'm smiling and have a shield, and this guy's like, I'm pointing my crossbow to basically point blank. All these guys seem very happy. They're trudging right up the ladder, which is being balanced in the boat. That seems so terrible. But when they get to the top, here are some dudes with bricks. And whatever the heck this is it like a miniature early cannon? Like, what is it? It looks like somebody straightened a dragon out and was like, spit at them, friends, spit at them. I appreciate their ladder is on the ground and not in the boat, but these poor horsies in the boat. I'm sorry, I keep yawning. And there's these guys over here. And again, all the Europeans look so happy. Oh, this is another fabulous painting too, because mostly their faces, they look very either concerned or this dude looks sort of angry, and these two dudes have rather large noses, which is pretty fabulous. They really don't seem to be in a consensus on anything. They just sort of seem a little upset. No one knows why, just they're all a little upset, but they have cool beards, so it's okay. Okay, so the Crusades don't really have a lasting impact in the Middle East. They come, they fight a while, they leave. It's not actually a huge deal in the Middle East, and the Middle East is already really more advanced than Europe, so when the Europeans come, it's not like they're taking anything from the Europeans in terms of like ideology or innovations or anything like that. In fact, the Europeans come into the Middle East and do a bunch of essentially voodoo on all of their injured people. Although that's slightly insulting to voodoo. And all of the Arabs are like, oh my god, what are you doing? The lady breaks her arm. They're like, cut off the arm. And the Arabs are like, no, we could just put it in a splint. And the Europeans are like, wafa. So you keep it straight and you wrap it up nice and tight, and then it just kind of heals and gets better. Wow. So, they didn't have a ton of impact in the Middle East because the Middle East didn't need it. Instead, what we care about, it has a huge impact on Europe. Huge impact. Europe is never the same after this. Also, Spain, Sicily, the island off of the coast of Italy, and the Baltic region are now considered to be Europe. Byzantium gets further weakened by, having Constantinople sacked by your supposed friends. The popes strengthen their position, and when I say popes, I don't mean that there's two popes at once. I mean that just like popes in general. Their position gets strengthened because I've been sending people out to go do these crusades and stuff. I swear I will stop yawning someday, but I guess today is not that day. But really, it whets Europe's appetite for luxury goods. That's what it does. The Europeans go over there's like silk, there's spices, there's good Indian cotton, there's all these jewels and like ironworked products, stuff from the African interior that's been traded up the Swahili coast, and all the Europeans are like, oh my god, this stuff is so fancy and cool, and my meat doesn't taste like it's rotten, because it is. This is amazing. Also from the Arabs, they learn how to make sugar, which directly impacts American slavery, because sugar is the thing that really needs all of the slaves in the Caribbean and parts of the United States. And when I say scholarship, I don't mean that there is a whole bunch of Europeans who are getting scholarships to go study at Arab universities. I mean that they get back from the Arabs all of the classical texts that they had lost during the Dark Ages. The Arabs have been preserving them and saving them and copying them, and the Europeans go over there and they're like, hey man, who's this? What's this book about? the Arabs are like, so this is Plato. He was a Greek. He wrote the Republic. Here's a copy in Latin for you. Go knock yourself out. And the Europeans are like, I can't read, but this seems cool. I will go back to Europe and figure out how to read, and then maybe this will be cool. And it kickstarts the Renaissance. But it did harden cultural barriers. It really allowed anti-Semitism to flourish. And it also really brings in the mindset of divine destiny, the idea that God wills it and therefore we must do it, as well as crusades are used later in other struggles ideologically. So this is used primarily by Nazis. The Nazis, this was a big talking point of theirs, that like it's very much us versus them, it's white people versus brown people, it's Christianity and civilization versus savagery and Islam and Judaism. And so this is actually a thing you will see fairly often in other white supremacist groups as well. They will sort of draw on the heritage of the Crusades to give support to their white supremacist ideas. Oh, I'm so sorry. Venice and Genoa promote economic growth. Venice and Genoa are both city-states in Italy. They had maintained control over their countryside for a long time, and they had served as trade centers for a long time. But in this time period, they promoted a sea route to the Holy Land for the knights, so that the knights could shorten their trip and save their horses a little bit by going across the Mediterranean from these port cities of Venice and Genoa. And then the knights would offer protection from pirates, which I personally think is hilarious. It really conjures up the image of like the knights are on the boat and the pirates are like trying to climb on the boat, and the knights are like, no, I shall whack you with my sword, get off the boat. Then a shark comes up and eats them. And then the ships would also carry goods as well. So it was like this double whammy of we're transporting all of the knights to go fight in the Crusades, but while we're there, I mean, we might as well pick up some trade goods. So, for example, woolen and cotton textiles, and wine from Europe. They would take all of these things down to the Middle East, and then they would trade for goods, for luxury goods, from the Middle East trading hub, which again are not necessarily Middle Eastern products. It could be cotton cloth and spices and tea from India. They could be silk and jewels from China. They could be, African interior products from the Swahili coast. But they are luxury goods, and they are coming through that port of trade in the Middle East. They also really create banking to facilitate that long-distance trade. People need to take out loans. People need a place to put their profits. This causes towns to grow and money to spread and the use of money to spread. And this is great because money does not make money if it just sits there. It just sits there. You make money by moving money around. Internal trade is facilitated as well, so people are trading their goods up and down Europe and all over and all that kind of stuff. We also really care about the Hanseatic League. The Hanseatic League was a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds. There's so many words in there. So all of these guilds of merchants would get together for commercial or trading reasons, but also defensive reasons. So to protect each other against corruption, to protect against practice problems, to protect against pirates, for goodness sakes, and bandits on the road. And the Hanseatic League was this huge sort of European Union-esque type thing. They controlled Northern European trade, and they gave each other mutual economic and military protection, aid, and privilege. So if you were part of the Hanseatic League, you got privileges. If you weren't part of the Hanseatic League, it was like having your Sam's Club idea or whatever. They helped each other when it came to like needing to take care of each other in a protection sort of way. They gave each other help, loans, bank stuff, all that kind of stuff. It was a good time for them. This is just a picture of Venice, because Venice looks super, 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 super pretty. I've always wanted to go to Venice. It looks gorgeous. I've heard it smells kind of terrible in some areas, but it looks beautiful. This is a collage of pictures of Genoa, still around today. Have also not been to Genoa, but it looks lovely. And then this is an emblem for the Hanseatic League. You can see it's got like a ship and it's so exciting. I did not include a picture of any Hanseatic League buildings because all of them are boring and terrible. Okay, so medieval social classes. We already saw from that one picture that there are three main social classes: knights, the clergy, and peasants. Most people by this time live in towns or villages, and slowly structure becomes more and more complex. For example, we get not just peasants and knights, but we also get craftsmen. Wow, I spelled that craftsmen. Craftsmen. Traders and merchants. They did clash with the nobility because they're demanding more rights and they're demanding more respect and more pay and stuff like that, and the nobility never wants to give anything away. And we also have the foundations of capitalism in here. So the foundations of this is what the market wants, this is what the market demands, the market decides who survives and who goes. The idea that of supply and demand, that the more people who demand your product and the less of it you have, the higher you can charge them for it, stuff like that. We also have the early stirrings of anti-Semitism in Europe, fueled again by the Crusades. The Catholic Church is against usury, and usury is the charging of interest on loans. So please remember that nowadays, when you get a loan, like a good interest rate on a loan is like 3.5%, 4%, and kind of it's still acceptable, but not nearly as good as like 7%, 8%. If you go out in the world today and you try to get a loan from a regular bank or credit union and they give you like a 13% loan, that is a terrible loan and you are being extorted basically. And they're taking advantage of you, and that is terrible and you should not sign that loan. During this time, we're talking like 60% interest rates kind of a thing. That's usury. Usury is these huge, incredible rates of interest. So we were talking last year about it. For Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and sometimes for black farmers who were sharecroppers in the American South in the 1890s, early 1900s, the interest rates would be like 150%. So you were always losing money no matter what you did. And so the Catholic Church is against that policy, and so sort of implicitly or subtly against loans a little bit and people who deal with loans. So a lot of bankers are Jewish, and it leads to resentment from Christians who are borrowing money. They blame the fact that they have to pay back the money and that it's slightly unfair. They place blame for that on the Jewish people. Instead of like, bankers are terrible, they make this leap to all bankers are Jewish and Jewish people are terrible. It doesn't, if somebody else was a banker, they would be fine. But because they're Jewish, that's what makes them terrible. Which obviously we know is not true at all. So they place a lot of blame and bigotry on the Jewish people. I was reading a book very similar to this. It was kind of a mix of ideas from this and also Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin being the whole spin thread into gold all night long, steal your firstborn child unless you can guess my name kind of a thing. Rumpelstiltskin. But in the story, it's about how this, the very beginning is about how this Jewish man is a money lender in this small village, and he knows that his neighbors don't like having to pay back their money, and he doesn't want to invite trouble for his family, and he's just too nice, so he never collects any of the money. And his daughter is like, that's dumb, we're barely surviving, my mom is sick, like, I'm gonna go collect the money. Despite the stereotypes, despite the fact that people may not like us because we're Jewish and we're asking them for our money back, I am going to do this. And then she is so good at turning getting money from nothing that like the local fairy prince is like, please come spin regular thread into gold for me, please. But there is this thread of anti-Semitism underneath all of that. In medieval Europe, hold on a second, I feel like I forgot something. Oh, I forgot to write something down. I'm sorry, I got all into my story about the readings I was doing. But this is why we read, because it connects all of these things and it makes everything more interesting. So, anti Semitism in medieval Europe, a lot of times they would segregate the Jewish populations into places called ghettos. And again, this is why it is really problematic to use the term ghetto as an adjective, because you are either hearkening back to these sort of very poorly run neighborhoods where they would segregate and corral Jewish people in Europe, ghettos, or you are referring to traditionally lower class communities of color, and therefore you are associating like bad things with their communities, which therefore are bad by association. So it's just a really problematic statement. And to call their neighborhoods, those neighborhoods like that, ghettos anyways, is still really, really problematic, because again, we're harkening back to this anti-Semitism in Europe. They put restrictions on Jewish people on whether or not they could own land or entering craft guilds. So because they had these avenues blocked to them a lot of times, they really only were able to be bankers or traders. And then they got flack for being bankers and traders. In the 13th century as well, that's the 1200s, English and French kings denounced and expelled Jewish people as well, and seized their property, stealing it. So they basically said, hey, we don't like you because you're Jewish. Get out or we'll kill you. And once you're gone, we'll take all your stuff because you're Jewish and we don't like you. Pogrom is the name for anti-Jewish mob actions that drove Jews to Eastern Europe. It's very problematic. Again, we have all of these sort of Western Europeans attacking Jews and Jewish people in their cities, segregating them into ghettos, still attacking them even after that. And in 1490 or so, 1490-ish, the King and Queen of Spain kick 62,000 Jewish people out of Spain. 62,000 Jewish people, who then move over to the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire was more religiously tolerant. So here is a picture of two Jewish men talking with each other in the medieval time period. You can tell it's the medieval time period because it's super flat, there's no depth. Also during this time period, we have a lot of restriction on women. Germanic customs had allowed women more freedom, or some freedom at least. They could often lead tribes like Boudica. They were thought to have the gift of prophecy and a special type of holiness. They also carried out all of the household duties with the help of slaves. And remember, during this time period, a slave does not necessarily mean a person of color. And in Germanic societies, there was very strong matrilineal ties. Can't spell. And in the Catholic Church, theoretically, we have the equality of the soul. So men and women's souls are equal and they're both going to heaven no matter what. The emphasis on Mary as the mother of Jesus means that women in general have more respect because, they see themselves in the Bible and other people see them in the Bible. They are also not segregated in services. So they get to sit next to the men during the church sermon, but they aren't allowed to take a leadership role in the church. Also, monastic life, or living in a monastery, is an alternative life to marriage because a lot of women don't want to get married. They don't want to get married. Although I think maybe marriage is a word, actually. A really, really archaic old word, but I still think it's an actual word. I'll look it up while I'm talking. A really good example of this is Hildegard von Bingen, and she was a sort of German monk of some, nun of some variety, who she wrote all the hymns, and she did lots of science and math and art, and she was just sort of a jack of all trades, a mistress of all trades, and she's just super famous for having done so much in her capacity as a nun. Yeah, you can't get married. Bummer. It sounded so cool. But as towns grow, women get excluded from guilds. And then literature continuously is stressing women's subservient role. kind of really good example of this is Beowulf, because in Beowulf, I think one of the women is named, and I believe it is Hrothgar's wife, but his daughter isn't named. Hrothgar's daughter isn't named. Beowulf's wife, if he even takes a wife, is never named. Beowulf's mother is never given a name, and even Grundle's mother is only known by the epithet Grundle's mother. Like, and they purposely misgender her several times to make her seem more monstrous, because apparently nothing could be more monstrous than a woman acting masculinely. Asking masculine. Here's a delightful, like, pagan symbol, though, of woman, female goddess. This very much to me looks like Aliens, and I love that, and now I want to rewatch the Alien movies. Here's a picture of Hildegard von Bingen, and she's leading all the other nuns to glory. Culture and stuff. During this time period, we get a bunch of universities that are getting established in Italy after the Crusades, because they're benefiting from that trade. The trade brings in money, and when you have money, you can do things like build universities. Invest in your people, invest in education, invest in infrastructure. Later, we get universities in England, France, and Germany. Please remember that the Mayan collapse happens right about the same time as the founding of Oxford University. Originally, they are for the clergy, so they are mostly only religious institutions, but later they combine from knowledge from the Greeks and Romans that they rediscovered from the Arabs. All that classical learning. And they develop a methodology called scholasticism, which is where you attempt to reconcile Christian theory, Christian theology, and Greek philosophy. A really good example of this is the Italian poet Dante Alighieri wrote several different very long poems about the different levels of the afterlife. So he's got heaven, he's got purgatory, he's got hell. They're all sort of together in the Divine Comedy. And when he goes down to explore hell, his guide in hell is one of those three big Greek philosophers. I think it's Aristotle. And Aristotle is only in hell because he did not live long enough for Christianity to be a thing. So literally his only sin and what has sent him to hell is that he is not a Christian. He couldn't have been a Christian because Christianity hadn't been invented yet, and yet he is still sent to hell for that. So scholasticism is like, well, your philosophy was great, but also you're going to hell because you're not a Christian, because Christianity technically wasn't around, but you really should have thought of that before you were born then. Also during this time period, we really get a new emphasis on the vernacular. The vernacular is the language everyday people can speak, and so now regular people can read literature. Oh, there's a great example of Dante's Divine Comedy. And then they go through the different layers of hell. There's a section on purgatory. It's pretty intense. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I haven't read those in a billion years, but they're still pretty good. They're a bunch of pilgrims going, and remember, the pilgrim just means somebody who's going to like a religious site or something like that. A bunch of pilgrims are traveling to the Canterbury Cathedral, and every night when they stop at an inn, a different person in the party shares a story. And they're all moral stories. They're all stories that like have some kind of lesson at the end of them or tie into biblical readings or biblical theology as well, but it's a more entertaining way to get those stories across. And Chaucer is considered to be like the first English poet. We also get Gothic cathedrals, which are gorgeous and wonderful, as well as architecture, lots of new architecture. They now have all the things, carvings like gargoyles, we've got stained glass, we've got Gothic music and just regular music, literature, sculpture, because the Renaissance, painting. It took a long time to build, though. The Cathedral of Notre Dame took 200 years. The Hagia Sophia took 5 years. 5 years to build. 200. And then we burned it down in an afternoon. Finally, here comes the Renaissance. Yay, the Renaissance. So what does all this mean? Ooh, wait, hold on. I believe that's Dante and the Divine Comedy in the background, all the different layers of hell, probably. Here's a picture of a medieval university. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have at least one person sleeping in class, so not much different from today. And whatever the heck this dude is doing. Is he sleeping? Is he like really upset? I don't even know. I don't think that's a woman. I think that's probably a man. But we have all these dudes hanging out in a university classroom. So that sort of looks like a woman. That'd be cool. Here's a picture of an illuminated manuscript out of the Canterbury Tales, and you can see if you could read it. It's a little hard to read, but if you can read it, you would see that it's only sort of half English, because it's written in Middle English. A lot of people are like, oh, Shakespeare is Old English. He's English that is old, but it is not Old English. Old English is basically irrecognizable to us, to our modern ears, and Middle English is middlingly easy to recognize. And Shakespeare may be archaic, and he may use some words that are out of date now and outmoded, but it's still modern English. And then some beautiful stained glass windows. I believe this is the inside of Notre Dame, and therefore it probably has melted. But beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stained glass windows. And stained glass windows were the way for the commoners to learn about and understand all of the basic Bible stories, because they couldn't read or write, and the sermon was usually in Latin if it was in a Roman Catholic church. So instead they would look at the windows, and that's how they would understand the stories and the morals. Again, here's a picture of Notre Dame. I'm still super, super, super sad about this, and so I'm not going to dwell on it. Oh, there's one last one. Maybe that one's not Notre Dame, but it's a beautiful Gothic cathedral. Oh, beautiful Notre Dame. So what does all this mean? It means that Europe is getting advanced enough to want more. It's also advanced enough to realize it's getting left behind. It's getting bypassed, overcharged, and overlooked. So European leaders start to want to make more inroads into global trade, specifically Africa and Asia. People don't use the Silk Road anymore as much because it takes so much longer than trading using ships. And please, next to where it says what does this all mean, this is like the 1400s. Please write like 1400s next to that, because they definitely used the Silk Road very, very, very much up until about the 1300s. Because right around 1336 is when the Black Death hits. And so when the Black Death hits, it kind of disrupts lots of trade routes, and people are like, let's maybe trade on the oceans instead. The Indian Ocean is the big trade network instead. It takes so much longer to go on the Silk Road than it does the Indian Ocean, and you can't carry as much stuff on camels as you can in a big ship. Europe has to get its Asian and African goods during this time period through specific ports closer to the trading: the Middle East, Venice, and Genoa. The closer trading ports also are upcharging them because that's how you make a profit. You skim a little off the top. So Europe wants to get directly to Asia, but how did they go? So they use ships to go around Africa, and then also they just sort of strike out to the west, and they're like, maybe we'll find India. They find the Americas, but hey, whatever. Oh, and then my favorite joke ever. Lucas, I am thy father. Nay! Do I have anything? Let's go on vacation with Miss Knappenberger before we get to the age of exploration. So this is a Gothic cathedral that we visited in Toledo, Spain. I don't have a lot of time either, so I'm just going to sort of run through this, but this is all beautiful wood carving. A lot of it is gilded, so covered in like gold leaf or gold paint. This is another beautiful Gothic cathedral. This one was in Barcelona, I believe. And there I am pounding on the door to ask for sanctuary, and some poor Spaniard is looking at me like I'm a crazy person, which, to be fair, I am. Here's another detail of some of the details of the Gothic cathedral. You can see there's lots of stone carvings. You can see all of the statues and stuff like that, the beautiful repeating geometric designs. Here's another gorgeous, gorgeous picture of the Gothic cathedral. I say gorgeous not because I took it, but because this Gothic cathedral is absolutely stunning. This is from the outside of, I want to say, St. Paul's Cathedral or the Vatican Museum, one of the two. But it's, again, beautiful Gothic architecture, and you can see the influence of the Greek and Roman architecture as well in this sort of column and lintel style here in these big, beautiful columns. This is the Pieta. This is by Michelangelo. That is the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Jesus, and it is one of the most powerful and famous Western sculptures of all time. And I got to see it in person, and it was really exciting. This is inside St. Paul's Cathedral, and this is... No, not St. Paul's Cathedral. That's in London. This is St. Peter's Basilica. There we go. And this is a beautiful big dome, again, created by Michelangelo, that has a hole in the ceiling, too, so that it, like, shines down. It's beautiful. Okay, so that's all the time we've got for today. We are actually going to put a pin in the Age of Exploration, and we're going to sort of leave that till last. So don't get rid of these notes, obviously, but put them somewhere else in your binder because we're going to come back to them later. Please and thank you. I'm just out of time, so I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Be good.